So great to have you here. One thing that caught my attention about your background was you're probably one of the very few longest tenured CMOs that I sort of know in my immediate network. So you're doing something right, which means that way. But obviously, people know who you are, and we can kickstart that discussion. Would love to sort of hear a very quick overview of your background, and then I would specifically sort of love to kickstart the discussion with how you've led marketing across different stages of the company. We can start the discussion with like your quick background.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me, by the way. So my background is I thought I would be an animator, actually. When I was little, I loved to draw cartoons, and I thought I was going to be an animator for The Simpsons. And so I was big into drawing and design and painting. Never thought I would be in tech. But then I got a computer and started programming and building websites, which was kind of like a nice overlap between design and technology. And then it kind of evolved from there. I got more into deeper programming. And by the time I was in college and graduating, I got a job as a software engineer. And that's what I was doing. I was building software. I did that for about 10 years. And I worked for a company called Fog Creek Software, where we worked on products like Trello and Stack Overflow. It was very successful, had a great experience. And then I got recruited to Varonis. This was back in 2011. Varonis is a data security company. It was in its infancy. It was early stage startup, and they were building a marketing team. They had won a couple of their first big deals and said, all right, we have sales pretty much figured out. We've got product market fit. Let's add marketing. And I got recruited because of my technical background. We have a technical buyer, being IT security people, cybersecurity pros, cloud security people. And they were like, you've got the perfect background. You're technical. You've done some security stuff, but you can also write. And I love doing webinars and things like that. So it was a good blend between, technical prowess and understanding marketing a little bit at that time.
Awesome. That's great background. But I actually genuinely meant what I said in the introduction, that you are actually one of the very few CMOs who have like 10 plus years of experience, or probably 15, I'm not sure, in like one company, and you've seen like all the different stages of the company. I would love to sort of hear your thoughts, like at a high level though. How did marketing function change, like when you guys are going from like 1 to 10 million, 10 to 100, 100 to 500? Like are there like things that you saw from your own eyes, like how things change, and just from a perspective of companies who are trying to scale similarly, what should I keep in mind? That's like the perspective.
Yeah. It's a good question, and it's super nuanced because it really does depend on how much funding you've raised, what your ICP is, whether you're product led or sales led. But I can just sort of speak to my experience. Is the biggest difference between when you don't have a ton of revenue to when you're a public company is your options are much more limited, right? You can't be the biggest sponsor at a trade show that all of your buyers go to and sort of be the big fish in the pond and have everybody coming up to your booth and wanting to speak to your CEO. You just don't have that luxury when you're early on. So you really have to pick your battles, and you need to be efficient and maybe over-index on things that are just a lot more scalable. But those things never go away. That's the thing. As you evolve, you still want those more scalable, more cost-effective things. And then you layer on some of these sort of luxury items, I guess, the Formula One race car, or whatever it might be, the big brand investments that you need to really, frankly, earn credibility to do. And, you always have to take care of your pipeline first. And I do really strongly believe that brand fuels demand. So it's not like you're doing brand at the expense of pipeline building. I don't really like to separate the two, but when you're early on, you have to make every dollar count.
Right.
For sure.
But on that point, Rob, like for me personally, right? Like obviously we are much smaller than you guys are, scaling company. If I'm in the position of leading a marketing team, I can do the scrappy stuff, and I do it very well. But tomorrow, when you're 100 million ARR, if you ask me to like figure out, hey, should we put $1 million in Formula One? I'll be scared, right? I'll be a little bit scared to do it. I don't know how you adapted yourself as you sort of went through the different sort of the company scaling journey, because it's very different mindset, right? So
yeah, and it's still scary, right? I wonder how the people at Salesforce feel just dumping so much money into brand. You watch a Formula One race, and not only do they have a car, but they're the number one sponsor on the track.
Right.
And they're the logo on Caitlin Clark's jersey, right? In the WNBA,
Yes.
the most
Yeah,
popular,
yeah,
athlete right now, possibly in the world. So,
correct.
to just be able to write those checks, check after check, and do Dreamforce. We're actually sponsoring Dreamforce this year. We're going to attend and have a little booth there and everything. But the money that they dump into that, knowing
Right.
it's a loss leader, but just having the utter confidence that they know it's good for business. And I think that stems from Mark Benioff being someone who really understands marketing and is okay with that. And the CMO probably feels a lot of relief knowing that no one's going to come back and say, hey, let's tally up all the leads from Formula One. It just doesn't work that way. And so I think the trick is to really build trust with your CFO, your CEO. And, many of them don't have marketing backgrounds. And in order to take out a full page ad in the Wall Street Journal, you have to kind of explain and educate them that, look, we're not really going to know how this is impacting the bottom line, but can we all agree that this is a smart thing? Does our audience read the Wall Street Journal, right? Can we all agree that the copy is compelling, right? So you kind of have to really earn that, and it never gets easy, right? So I don't think that nervousness around writing big checks on things you can't measure, that never goes away for me, at least.
On the point, Rob, you mentioned it's a good segue. Like, how do you build your, like, at least the trust that you spoke about with your CEO over those like 10, 15 plus year journey? And was he from a marketing background, which I'm sure not, otherwise you wouldn't have started a cybersecurity company. But like, how do you educate him on a few of those things, and how did that sort of relationship grow over the years?
Yeah, I can tell you how it happened for me, and I don't know this will be broadly applicable because I really do think it's a personality thing. So our CEO, I've worked with him since 2011 when I joined the company, and I remember actually being in the interview, and he asked me if I had an MBA, and I said no. I was a software developer. This is actually my first time applying for a marketing role, and he's like, good. And I kind of knew from there that he was an engineer himself, and he really valued technical credibility in marketing. And so you kind of have to know, because I'm sure other CEOs are, valuing communications or valuing sales development experience. And, there's often like 4 paths that a CMO comes up through. You either come up through product marketing, branding, comms, sales development, or demand gen, which could be either on the event side or digital demand gen. And you kind of, have your point system where you might be a 10 out of 10 at demand gen, but you've never done crisis communication, right? Which is also typically in marketing, especially in bigger organizations. And so the CEO really has to know what they're looking for and the style of marketing that they like. And you as the CMO have to know what they're looking for as well, and building trust through what they value. If they're very analytical, which my CEO is, you have to be really good at analytics. Your board presentations have to be airtight. That's something that I think every CMO has to understand. SaaS metrics, has to have some sort of data literacy, and sort of demand that of their VPs and their directors as well.
That's awesome, Rob. I was going to ask you what kinds of metrics you typically show in the board, but I'll probably skip that one. But in terms of the qualities that you think a marketing leader needs at these different stages. Let's say I give you a scenario, right? A company is trying to hire a head of marketing, right? And they're a top-down sales motion, right? 30, 40K ACV, let's say, right? What kinds of marketing leaders will succeed in 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 500? Like, what should the qualities should they look for when a company is trying to make a hire like that?
Yeah, I think since you mentioned top-down sales-led go-to-market motion, I think a marketing leader that knows how to partner with sales is essential. I think even at the early stages, that's critical, because otherwise you have your head of sales and your head of marketing constantly in conflict as to what kind of demand gen activities we should be doing. So really building that partnership, and that comes through aiming for the same targets, being aligned on metrics, and really just open communication. So that would be the first thing I would look at. And that wouldn't be quite as important if I were Notion, for instance, a company that is probably almost exclusively product led. A lot of their leads come in through free trials, and then maybe you sell. You move up the chain, sell to the executives after you've already got half the company using the product. So
Right.
I think that's a totally different. Maybe you want someone who's more of that sort of growth marketer, who's very scrappy, run a lot, is very experiment oriented, loves running A/B tests. So I think it does vary depending on go-to-market motion. But since you said sales led, I think understanding how enterprise sales teams work, how they hire, being adept at measuring pipeline and understanding pipeline velocity and how you can help sales teams to push deals through the funnel, all of that is something I would look for.
Makes sense. And then apart from that, do you see any difference in skill set from like 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to 500? Like, do you think the scrappiness kind of goes away as you sort of become like, I don't know, 50 million ARR company, then it's all about process and like I don't know if you had any thoughts on that journey.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the scrappiness never goes away, right? I would feel like a shell of an employee if I didn't actually get my hands dirty in some way. And I know some executives, don't feel the same way, right? They feel like if they are actually putting hands on keyboard, then they're doing something wrong. I really don't feel that way. And I know, I actually just read something by Dharmesh Shah, who's the CTO of HubSpot. He was a co-founder, and I know he's really still feels like part of his role, even as a CTO of a huge company, is to know what he's talking about, when it comes to the technology that he's building and still coding. And yeah, you don't want it to be 99% of your week, but I think you still have to be scrappy.
For sure.
No matter how big your company is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Rob. That's a great point. On that point, right? Are there any B2B brands that you admire in general outside Varonis, right? Any industry, doesn't matter. Anything that comes to your mind?
Yeah, actually, we rebranded in January of this year. And
I love your brand, by the way. I saw the website. It's pretty cool.
Thank you.
There's a robot sitting in the homepage, right? It's like I saw that.
Yeah. So we did a lot of thinking, my head of creative and myself, last year when we were heading into this rebrand, which we got done in record time. I think it took us less than 3 months to execute the rebrand fully. But we were looking at other brands and asking ourselves that same question, like, who do we admire? And the brands that came up were CrowdStrike, Salesforce, Wiz. Wiz is a company in cybersecurity that's been a phenomenal growth story. And we started asking ourselves, what do we love about these brands? And it came down to the fact that they had personality, right? So think about Salesforce. You walk into Dreamforce or you walk into the Salesforce headquarters in New York, and it just exudes personality. You've got like the little woodland creatures, or you walk into Dreamforce and it's a forest, right? It's an actual forest. It's so memorable, right? So many of the B2B brands out there, you have gradients, you might have some clean design, you might have some shapes, some abstract things, but there's no personality to it. So Salesforce has their woodland creatures, CrowdStrike has their adversaries, right? And their falcon. And then you've got Wiz with this whole lighthearted, like wizardy theme, right? So to me, our brand had to be unmistakable and it had to have personality. And that's what's the genesis of this robot character who we call Protector 22814. 22814 is the date of our IPO. And, when we build new marketing assets, we always ask ourselves, is it in world, right? We wanted to almost feel like we were designing a video game, right? Because it's memorable. Like Xbox has a cool brand. Call of Duty has a cool brand. You could think all across the consumer space and things that are just memorable. They sort of have some sort of these, unmistakable elements throughout, right? We didn't want to just be another boring B2B brand that was safe, and I can call out a ton of brands like that. As you walk through some of the trade shows in our industry and you just, you can cover the logo and they would feel like the same. You wouldn't recognize them, right? And we wanted that to be the opposite, is you would unmistakably know Varonis was the brand with the giant robot, love it or hate it, right? And in choosing that robot, we market to an audience where that is sort of, it's something that we know is popular. These are cybersecurity pros. And so if we were Salesforce or someone else, we might choose something different, a different path, but regardless, I'd always want it to have personality.
That's a great point, Rob. I'm gonna clip this and send it to our internal team. And also, pretty humble of you to name a few more companies in the cybersecurity space, right? Obviously, they're in different buckets of things, but I at least I haven't thought about like Wiz and CrowdStrike in that lens, but now you mentioned it, I'll probably pay more attention to sort of how they market themselves in the ecosystem. So thanks for sharing that. One sort of earlier point you mentioned before when you started was that brand drives demand, right? Like, how are you thinking about those investments at Varonis, and also what would your guidance be in terms of how should companies think about investing in brand versus demand, and what are typical brand investments like? Right? It's a very nebulous word, so I'm trying to figure out what could those investments look like.
Yeah. So one of the, I think, safer brand investments that you can make are trade shows. And I know that's going to be an unpopular statement, because a lot of people see trade shows as a waste. I actually don't. I view it as brand investment with little spillage, right? So in my space, the RSA conference or the Black Hat conference, these are big industry events. And I treat my booth as a ad unit. So instead of paying a fortune to advertise in Times Square or take over an airport for a month where I'm going to get a ton of spillage, I'm going to have a million people go through that airport that don't care about cybersecurity whatsoever. And of course, I'm going to catch some chief information officers. But when I treat my investment at a trade show as part brand, where I know I have the attention of a lot of the people in my audience, and I can use my booth as an ad unit, and back to my point about not being boring, like your booth has to not look like everybody else's, it has to be really cool. So I think about it that way, because there's little spillage. Right. And then there's the demand side too, right? The people we scan at our booth are not going to be hot leads necessarily. Although I will say that sometimes you'll meet someone at the booth who's an executive, you'll do a demo at your demo station. And this actually happened at our Black Hat conference. They happened to be running one of the biggest banks in EMEA, and was like, "Is your CEO at the event?" And I'm like, "Actually, as a matter of fact, he is. And he's in meeting room C on the second floor. Would you like to book a time later today?" Booked a time. Now we have an opportunity. I would call that demand generation, right? And so you can do a lot of ancillary things, host dinners, like these industry events. If you do them right, I feel like can be massive for brand building. At the same time, you're actually building demand. You're opening opportunities on the back of those events. So I love that. You have to figure out, I think, what percentage of your overall budget you want to devote to short-term brand demand generation versus these bigger brand bets. And, I think boards get uncomfortable if 65%, 60% of your budget is not towards demand, especially when you're a public company and you've got quarterly accountability, which we do. And so I think you have to figure out that percentage and figure out also where you are in terms of the spectrum of awareness. I think that should dictate your brand investment as well. So if nobody knows who you are, right, you obviously got a lot more work to do.
That's helpful. On a financial note, I think one thing we were discussing was that I feel your team is lean, right, compared to the size of the scale you are in, right? And we don't know what are the exact numbers, etc. But like, curious how, like, what is your philosophy on like teams in general as the company scales, right? Since obviously on engineering mindset, I'm sure you have applied some math to the problem. Just curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think team size, regardless if we're talking about marketing or not, it's all about quality, right? Think about how many engineers OpenAI had when they launched ChatGPT, or look at the employee count at Anthropic, and then look at the employee count at Google or Microsoft. And, look who's moving faster. It's not always about the size of the team. It really is about quality. And throughout my career, especially when I was working at Fog Creek Software, I saw the magic of hiring the best talent in the world and having a very lean team and creating products that had millions and millions of monthly users with very little marketing, and just sort of being able to outperform these big companies with these sort of bloated teams. And so, we have a pretty strict hiring process at Varonis. I think the areas in which we expand are usually because we're adding a new function or want to develop or devote more focus to a specific function. Like I mentioned trade shows, right? Now we have a corporate events team now, right? We didn't have that 2 years ago. Even though we were running corporate events, it was sort of like a part-time job of our field marketers also whenever a big event was coming up to break off part of their week to work on these big corporate events in addition to all their regional marketing responsibilities. And so you kind of figure out, say, all right, this tactic is working, this function is needed, and then you grow from there and you hire only the best people on the market. That's kind of my philosophy versus saying, okay, we're at 250 million in revenue or whatever. I think we should have a PR comms team. It should probably be 5 people because so-and-so's company has 5 people, and you hire people just to fill seats. And then, if they're low quality people that need a lot of hand holding, it's draining time for your best performers. And so I actually like being lean in some regards. And I think it gives us an advantage because we can move faster.
That's very helpful, Rob. And since we spoke about, again, the corporate events team and the trade show piece in the previous conversation, have you figured out any like great tips or tactics or process that teams can institute to get the most out of a trade show investment, right? Are there pre-event sort of behaviors, during event behaviors, and post-event behaviors that teams can adapt if they want to really nail the investment, because it gets expensive, right? So I want to hear your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, and I wish it were easy, right? We have 2 wonderful people, and we're adding more working on single events like Black Hat, right? So it's 3 months ahead of time that we're planning, 3 to 4 months ahead of time. And I think the biggest thing is, there's so many different components. We do this concept of tiger teams where we break out cross-functional teams to work on booth design, post-event follow-up, pre-event sort of meeting booking for our executives. And so we kind of have these sub-teams that are responsible for different aspects. And it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of creativity when you think about, what giveaways are going to be popular. There's so many different details. How are people going to find our meeting room, right? What if someone's wandering through the trade show hall? So being able to send a prospect or a customer an invite to that meeting that has a little map of the trade show floor with arrows on it. There's so many little details that go into it. And so I would say my biggest tip is hire people who have done it before if you can afford them, right? Because there's going to be details that a novice is just never going to see. And even between, RSA conference, which was earlier in the spring, and Black Hat, which was in the summer, we thought we had it wired at RSA conference. And, our team is constantly sort of self-evaluating and saying, wait, we actually missed some, even though it was a fantastic event for us, we actually missed a few things. And then we improved those for the next event. And then the post-mortem for Black Hat, we found a few more things we want to upgrade. So yeah, I think the other sort of tactic that I think I can recommend to people is have an iPad with Calendly or something like that on it in the booth, or a few of them. And when you're doing a demo with somebody, be like, I gave you a brief demo, but I would love to show your team afterwards. And then you just give them the iPad and have them fill out. It's one of those no-brainers, but you come back with not just these scans that you have to kind of follow up with. You come out with actual meetings on the calendar, which is kind of cool.
Have you heard of this famous thing called collision brother tactic? I don't know if you've heard of that. Apparently, when Stripe started by the Collision brothers in Y Combinator, all the other founders will go and demo the product and be like, hey, you know what? I'll send you a follow-up email. Let's set up some time after and sort of talk about it. And these guys would be like, okay, give me a laptop. Let me just do it literally right now and sort of get the next steps going, and shows the urgency and the level of commitment you can give to the person as well. So that's a very smart tactic. Cool. Awesome. Any sort of tips on AI, Rob? I know that you are still experimenting early phases, and we sort of spoke about you are worried that AI could take the quality down from marketing team. Any high level thoughts that you have?
Yeah, I think I use AI a lot for research, and it's great for creative brainstorming too, just bouncing ideas off of AI. But I do worry that automating the human touch will it will be transparent to your buyer. And I think that's the litmus test is once it becomes unmistakable, you can't discern the difference between an AI automated message versus, an SDR written message, or, SDR, or copywriter written ad copy, then maybe there's like a debate. But I've seen a lot of, frankly, bad content that's AI generated that people are posting on their blogs. It's clearly, the buyer can see through it. I think that's what worries me, because even before AI really exploded, I thought there was like especially in the marketing world, a lot of thin content on the web. I love deep content, right? And Stripe is a good example, right? Like their blog, if you read their blog, it's written by experts, right? Who are really, they understand developers, they understand the persona, and they're not writing like top 5 things developers should know about payments, right? They're not polluting the internet with this sort of fluffy content marketing, which a lot of vendors have. And so I just think AI is going to accelerate a lot of that, make it worse than it already is.
So you're being thoughtful about it, being a little bit more careful compared to this, like, hey, let's just get an AI vendor in to the company and start seeing this working. Makes sense. Cool.
Yeah.
A final question for me. Since obviously you have like a very unique path to becoming a CMO that you wouldn't have even thought, 15 years back to be a CMO, right? What guidance would you have for middle management marketing teams who aspire to become CMO someday?
I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is you have to learn how to communicate up, down, and across better than ever. That's a lot of the job, is to convince other stakeholders, whether it's board members, your CEO, head of sales for UK, head of sales for Asia. You have to think globally, but being analytical, being persuasive, being transparent with your goals, especially, being CMO, you're going to manage teams of teams, right? Especially if you're at a bigger organization. And so focusing on those leadership skills, your analytics, your ability to communicate and convince, those are the things that are going to matter most. And being intellectually honest, I think, open-minded, these are the characteristics I would say to work on. There's a blog that I love. It's written by a woman named Wes Kao. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. It's Kao. She worked for Seth Godin for a while. She now has her own company, and she writes phenomenal leadership advice. I think if you were to read her blog and to take her advice to heart, you would have a lot of the attributes it takes to be an executive of any kind. And I think especially as CMO, where you're kind of caught in the middle a lot of times and everyone wants everything from marketing. And so you have to learn how to say no and be firm, but you also have to not be the wet blanket all the time and be seen as someone who's going to impede progress for the company.
Right. So the person Westkov has a blog that she maintains. Okay, that's very helpful even for me. I would love to read that blog. Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, it's excellent. She has a newsletter. It comes out weekly, and she does executive coaching and stuff like that as well, which I haven't explored myself, but I'm sure it's amazing because her writing is phenomenal.
Awesome. Rob, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for doing this. Like I said, I'll probably repeat this like 10 times. I've not seen CMOs, who have sort of been through the different company building stages, and the fact that you guys have just touched 500 million ARR, it's like just a pretty amazing milestone. So kudos to you and your team. Now you mentioned about the philosophy behind the brand. I'll probably keep watching you guys in terms of whether you guys follow that personality that you have in mind. But thanks for taking the time to do this. We really appreciate it.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having me.